Today we're going to do a traditional Southern food that we're going to use grits. Grits are hominy based, usually an alkali hominy, and it's dried corn that's treated with alkali, and then it's ground up very well. So we're going to start. Now the thing you want to make sure that you're using is not instant grits, but quick grits. If you use instant grits, it's going to be ready in about 30 seconds and it's not going to work at all. So make sure you've got the right one as you work through process. I'm going to start with 2½ cups of just plain old tap water. And we're going to put that in. And then I'm also going to put in 1 cup of milk. Now I'm using a fat-free milk because we're going to be adding fat later on. This is a cheese grits recipe. We're making cheese grits with black beans, and so we don't need to add much fat at this point in time. I'm also going to add a little bit of salt. Now we're getting salt from several of the other ingredients too, so we're only going to use about a ½ teaspoon of salt. If you normally use more than that when you make grits, keep in mind that you can always add some more seasoning later on, but you can't take it out. So we're going to start with the smallest amount. To that, I'm also going to add 1/8 teaspoon of paprika. Just stir that on the side or on the top. I love the way it disperses that way. And then also a 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne. And so that's going in there as well. And I may have gotten those mixed up, but those are the right ingredients, maybe not in the right order. And then also a little bit of hot sauce. Now this is about, for me, about 4 drops of hot sauce, but again, this is one of those things that you can amp up as it goes. What you want to do though is, because this is going to cook for quite a while and there may be some loss of flavor or some concentration, that it's a better idea to let it come back and then add more hot sauce at the table, and that way everybody gets it the way that they want it. We're going to let this come up to a boil. Now when you have milk in a dish and you're bringing it to a boil, you're going to have to keep an eye on it. You don't have to stare at it constantly. But milk is, even though it's diluted with the water, it's going to start to form a skin, and that's going to raise the level of the milk up until you eventually get it boiled over. So you want to keep an eye on it. Happened to my daughter not long ago. She was curious about the alchemy involved as opposed to the chemistry when she called while cleaning up a whole counter full of milk. But keep an eye on it, bring it to a boil, and then we're going to add the grits. And we're going to add them real slowly in a steady stream to make sure that they don't lump up. But right now we just have to wait for a moment or two. Okay, you can see that the milk has started to boil. I've turned the heat down a little bit, and it was starting to climb up in the container a little bit. So now we're going to just whisk in the grits. Slow and steady. If you just dump them in, the outside is going to cook and you're never going to get to the center. We're going to let this slowly cook over a low heat for probably closer to 10 minutes than 5, even though the box tells me it's going to be done in 5 minutes. I want it to really cook well and be nice and creamy. So I'm going to come back and check on it from time to time. We're going to put a lid on it when I make sure it's not going to boil over. And we'll leave that, coming back to check on it. Everything is in there with the exception of the cheese. So we'll come back, giving it that 10 minutes. We'll give it plenty of time to get nice and creamy. It also swells up. Each one of those kernels swells up, so it gets nice and thick, and the longer and the slower it cooks, the more smooth it's going to be. So we want to make sure that that happens as well. Now we need the topping. This is the base for our dish. So now we need the part with the black beans, since we're making cheese grits and black beans. So we're going to start our burner, and I've got 1½ tablespoons of oil, and to that I'm going to add 1 red bell pepper. Now this is not the best time to use those that you have frozen, because in all probability if you have some that are frozen, they're going to have ice crystals on them, and we don't want to be adding basically water to the oil. So you want to use fresh ones for this particular purpose. So I've got 1 red bell pepper, 1 green bell pepper. You could use whatever colors you want. If you only had green, that would work as well, because we're going to add some red in another way. All right, to that we're also going to add some green onions. So I've got about 6 green onions that have been chopped up. We're going to add this to that as well. And we're going to let that cook for about 5 minutes also. So we've got one pot going 5 minutes, another pot going 5 minutes. So this is a recipe that's going to total take 15 to 20 minutes to do the actual cooking, but it's one that you can't leave and go away from. You pretty much have to stay with it. These need to cook until they start to soften just a little bit. We don't want it to really overdo it, but we do need to get them to start to mellow out a tad. Okay, the vegetables have started to soften up. Now they're going to cook a little bit more, so you don't want to do too much. At this point, if you had fresh tomatoes, you could use 3/4 of a cup of chopped fresh tomatoes. I didn't have fresh tomatoes right now, so 3/4 of a cup of canned tomatoes work fine. Don't worry about draining them because we're going to add some liquid to it. You can always cook it down just a tad, and if there's a little bit too much liquid, it just makes nice gravy. Also to this, I'm going to add 1/4 of a cup of low sodium chicken broth. Now, this already it's going to have cheese in it, so it's not going to be vegetarian per se. So it didn't bother me to use a chicken broth. If you wanted it to be vegetarian, you could get a cheese substitute and use a vegetable broth. That works fine. Now, I'm using also a low sodium chicken broth. So I'm going to add a little bit of salt to this. I've got about 1/2 teaspoon of kosher salt that's going in here as well. And another 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper. This is going to be a spicy dish. So again, if this becomes too spicy for you, you can always cut it down. If you think it needs a boost, that's what hot sauce is for at the table. Then I've got a can of black beans. Now you could use 2 cups of home-cooked black beans. I use the type, again, with no salt added to them or reduced sodium variety. But look at all the color we've got here. Who's going to be able to resist this when it comes time to eat? That looks just great. And then this is just going to sit there and simmer so those flavors have time to blend together a little bit for about 5 minutes. So while that's working, let's take another look at our grits and see how they're doing. Oh, they're doing very nice. Let me turn it down just a little bit. It's spitting a little bit more than I want it to. As you're doing this, become familiar with your stove. I think that's one of the things that happens when I'm at home. I have a different kind of stove, and so I know what to set it at. If you have an electric burner, remember that it's going to react much more slowly, and so that when you turn the heat down, it's going to take a while for it to get there. So anticipate what's going to happen. On the burner that I have at home, I actually, when I put something in, I can bring it up to a simmer, and because it's electric and it's solid element, I can turn it off, and I won't have to even use any energy. So look for ways where you can cut down the amount of energy that you're using while you're cooking. I think everything is ready. Basically, we just needed this to heat through and let those flavors go together, so that's happened. So we'll turn that off. It should stay plenty warm while we're waiting. The only other step we have to do here is finish off the grits. So I'm going to turn them off too because they're nice and thick, as you can see. Nice and creamy. And we're going to stir in the cheese. Now, when I looked at the recipe, it called for a cup of cheese, cheddar shredded cheese, and I wanted to cut back the amount of fat. So I cut it back to 1/2 cup and switched to a sharp cheddar, which gives you a little bit more fat ounce per ounce, but also lets you use a lot less ounces. So it's more concentrated in flavor, gives you a lot more bang for your buck, so you end up with a lower fat product as a result. Now this we're going to use as our base, so we'll put that on the bottom here, somewhere between 1/2 and 3/4 of a cup. One of the things you can do if you're trying to control portions with things like this is actually use a metal measuring cup as your scoop so that you get the amount that you anticipate you're getting, and that helps keep portions under control a little bit. And then we put our black beans over the top and get a little bit of that gravy in there. And this makes a terrific dinner or lunch. I hope you're going to try this one. It's really, really good. This is cheese grits with black beans. For Oklahoma Gardening, I'm Barbara Brown.